Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Back with the boys, Grant, Mark. Good morning. How we doing?
Good.
Doing great, boss.
Hey, Grant, we got a little rain in Iowa. Not much.
Yeah.
Not a little bit, though.
It's been extremely hot throughout the Midwest, man. Crazy.
What are you laughing about, Mirikitani?
We're bringing people weather on the 10s. Like Ostrander's turning to Al Roker. I just don't even know what just happened there. Like, let's cut to Mark for the weather.
All right. Tell you what, Arizona, Phoenix they just broke a record over 30 days of 110, and then it was 106 one day, so now they're starting over. And it's hot. It's a dry heat, that's what I hear.
There you go.
Dry heat, but it's hot.
There you go. All
That's
right.
the weather for the day. I'm here all week if you need to talk to me.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. All right. Let's start with whenever we can start about with good news tied to USA Wrestling, we should do it. Jordan Rainey, Greco age group U17 World Champion. Sahakian was 5th. The team is 4th after the first 5 weights. We've talked about this before, that we're very, very good at these age groups, especially sort of the pre-college weights, like the U15, 17s, 20s. GT, in all seriousness, you're the guy that probably spends the most time focused on international wrestling of the three of us. How significant is this? Because it feels like age group Greco World Champions are not nearly as frequent as freestyle.
Yeah, I mean, I think we put a lot more emphasis on freestyle within the U.S., just in general, I think. So anytime that you come away with, like a world champ at age group categories for either freestyle and or Greco, it's a huge deal. And when I say freestyle, I also mean including women's freestyle as well, because I believe the women are going right now. I just saw a clip from the UWW with Turner from Illinois.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anytime that we bring home medals in any 3 of those styles, it's a big deal. But I think for us, meaning the United States, it does help us out quite a bit to, build that Greco pipeline a little bit more, just because I know that we have a really good system for men's and women's freestyle right now.
Yeah, and so we're recording this a day early on Wednesday, and Morgan Turner, Heather Kroll, and Piper Fowler are all in the semis at this point when we're recording on Wednesday morning. And USA Wrestling also has the article that says, this is back-to-back Greco U17 champs with Joel Adams last year, and then the run he made, beating a former Olympian at the U.S. Open, and just won Fargo. I think it's interesting. Well, so Mark, your thoughts on Rainey, especially like a Kentucky kid, right? A non-traditional state in wrestling, not coming out of a traditional school power or anything like that. I know he's had some really good coaches throughout the years, but again, somebody who's sort of, if you're not a deep diver, sort of a where the heck did him and his brother come from kind of kids, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Kentucky. They don't have a college program. You don't hear.
Well, then Lindsey Wilson's down there.
Okay, I'm sorry, David. I meant a Division I program. So
fair.
That's kind of, but yeah, it's great. Him and his brother, made a name for themselves, I think, a year or 2 ago at Fargo, where they upset some really outstanding individuals. So that's where they came on the radar, and they haven't got it off. They haven't got off it since. So they've been continually to get better, and they're just as good at freestyle, David. They're really good at freestyle also. So these kids can flat out wrestle.
Yeah, I think it gives a lot of kids hope. I think maybe that's the biggest picture, right? Like, you can be in a unique situation, like you can be in a Kentucky, you can be in an Arkansas, just to pick some states that are not, you can be in Alabama, you can be in Louisiana, where coaches are working hard and they're doing good things with kids, but they haven't had the same success of Pennsylvania, Illinois, California, Iowa, Missouri, whatever, Oklahoma, these traditional states that, or states where I live in,
Sure.
but there's multiple ways to get there. And people talk about it all the time. To do something, it helps to see somebody do it first. Right. Like I was talking to Willie Saylor yesterday, and I was talking about, I used to watch those guys on FRL. And, when we started this, it's like, okay, at least I've seen somebody do it. And, okay, it's not impossible and it's not terrifying. It's just kind of scary. And so same thing, for somebody, these kids from Kentucky to blow up, and other kids have certainly done it, but there's blowing up and then there's winning an age group medal. So there's levels of blow. We're excited for them, and then the example it says, it looks like, Sahakian's another kid I know, because I was with Pritz in Fargo. He's a kid that's committed to them until he signs. I'm sure they can't talk about it, but a big recruit out of California, out of Don Bosco, the garage down there, or St. John's Bosco, excuse me. And so it's good to see us having success as a country there. And a ton goes to these coaches that invest in these kids individually, their personal coaches. So congratulations to them.
I got a quick question for Grant, David. I wanted to ask Grant, maybe you know the question also. When we have success at Greco on a, age level world stage, does that help with donors supporting the sport? Because I know that's a big part. I know that freestyle has a lot of money coming in, helping these kids, training and everything else. But does that help the Greco much when we have world champions at the different age levels?
I
think we lost your volume, GT.
Sorry, I was coughing there earlier, so I put myself on mute. So
okay.
I think it lends itself to the program as a whole. As you have development on your way up, it's very similar, like prospects in like the NFL or prospects in baseball. It's like, well, hey, we got a good farm system. We got people coming up, the future is bright, and then also to your guys' points earlier, having people from new states bring new attention, bring new money. You never know who's going to be the next multi-millionaire that could be connected to wrestling and their kids get into it. And, something along those lines where all of a sudden you have an advocate coming from Kentucky or Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, wherever it may be. And you're like, oh, wrestling's on the up. My kid loves Greco. And then all of a sudden he becomes a fan of Greco, and that helps USA Wrestling on a lot of fronts. But, once again, the financial aspect of, being a donor of USA Wrestling or trying to develop, I think a lot of money to USA Wrestling also goes directly through kind of the RTC movement. So that all by extension helps, keeping these coaches, like coaching kids that are local, not necessarily at all Division I institutions, but just RTCs in general, where, maybe the best RTC in the entire state of Kentucky is at, Lindsey Wilson or Cumberland, or, where they're getting access to good coaching or higher level wrestling partners.
GT, the point you started with about multimillionaires or people associated with these young men and women, I think that's so true. Like our sport, you go all the way back to the Foxcatcher days with DuPont and how that was super helpful, and then obviously went completely in the worst direction possible. But you look at like the Art Martoris and the Andy Bars and how many people's dreams they bankrolled, and just these people getting to tournaments and not. And the ROI that these people are getting for Sunkist and Titan Mercury, it's very difficult to say, well, they're literally making their money back. I mean, this is basically a donation to the sport that they love. I know Martori was actually a really good wrestler, but most of the guys that were, and I don't want to exclude women, but most of the donors, the millionaires that are doing this at this point, I think are men, but regardless. And I can say men because there wasn't wrestling for women really 30 years ago. So these people that are doing it now, a lot of them were not world-class wrestlers, but they loved the sport. They loved what it did for them. They loved the relationships it brought them. And so you're right. Like you see GoFundMe's, all these things pop up every summer so kids can go to Fargo. I mean, people are doing it at the $20, $50, $100 level too, as well as the $100,000, $500,000, $1 million level. So, everybody's trying to figure out how to monetize what they're doing, how to afford what they're doing, try to keep costs down. I mean, it's probably a great time to thank all the people in our sport that are literally giving people money for wrestling. Like, I mean, it's definitely a thing, and that sort of ties into like NIL and all that other stuff, which I think we're going to touch on here later. But anyway, so when we talk next week, we'll have the results from the back half of the Greco, all the girls, and then the boys. So, but good luck to everybody competing over there, and congratulations so far on everything that's happened. So GT Poland, looks like America had a lot of good results. I saw Fix beat DeSanto. Didn't look like there were any major upsets or anything else. Oh, wait. Andrew Alira has beat Haji Aliyev 8-0, right? So that was that's massively significant, right?
I mean, like, anytime that you can beat a proven guy like Haji, like Haji is a super accomplished wrestler, world champion, multiple time medalist in both Europeans and worlds. So, anytime you get a chance to like knock off a name, and it was Alira's first run back to freestyle, which was our since winning the NCAA title, I believe, like internationally. So huge win there. I think there's some other guys. I think like McFadden won it. So it was just a really good USA showing in all styles, I believe. I want to say Kamal had a really, really good tournament as well for the Greco athletes, beating a lot of big names, like huge tournament for him heading into the World Championships. But really good results from all three styles in Poland.
I think didn't Gwiz beat somebody really good too, Grant, at heavyweight?
Yeah, it was really tough to follow the tournament because it was on a Polish website, and the brackets were all kind of weird and messed up. Not to say that the Polish internet is not easy to navigate, but I was having trouble keeping up with some of the live results. So I would just kind of catch the box score every once in a while from USA Wrestling. But yeah, Gwiz, I want to say he beat somebody, but I can't pull it up right off the top of my head.
That's fine. I mean, I think it's interesting. You see people make level jumps, right? Like for me, I didn't win state as a freshman, and then I wrestled in a Greco match and I beat a guy 18-17. And it was one of the few tournaments my dad didn't go to. And then he was at Colorado Springs or something. And then they told me after I beat the guy that he was a big school Illinois state runner-up. And I could just have easily lost the match, but it gave me confidence in my mind. I'm like, okay, there was only 2 classes in Illinois then, and Illinois was significantly better than Missouri. I'm like, well, if I can beat the guy who's second in Illinois, I can probably be first in Missouri. And I was lucky enough to have Alira and Nickerson on the pod after NCAAs. But it's still like, I think I can be the best in the world. Okay. I mean, a lot of people say that, right, at that level. But when you go beat somebody that's got massive credentials, it moves you closer to that goal in your own mind. I think you see yourself in a different light. So, a lot of us, I'm sure at one point I felt this way. I thought Real Woods was going to win nationals. Alira's had been ranked first all year and then wasn't seeded first and all that kind of stuff. And they were both undefeated. And he kind of wrestled everybody he could, but Northern Colorado doesn't obviously have a Big Ten schedule. And so it feels like this is a big jump for him in terms of maybe just solidifying where he is in his mind. I mean, Mark, you coached a lot of guys that jump levels over the years. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I guess my concerns now are, does Alira take an Olympic redshirt year and try to make the Olympic team? next year. It's a weight that's, I would say it's not that it's not a really good weight, but it's not our best weights. So, I mean, I think he's right in the hunt there to make a shot. So does he spend from now until then just freestyle preparing for that after this big win? I think that's something we're going to find out here, fairly soon. But I think he's definitely in the conversation to be, at the top of the weight in America to make the Olympic team.
Yeah, I think 65 is an interesting weight. Like until Yanni medaled, I think it was in 22 GT. Like we hadn't had an Olympic or a world medalist at that weight since Bill Zadek, I think, and obviously the weight's slightly different, like it was 66, 67, whatever the case may be. But, Nick Lee makes the team. And it might be interesting. Maybe they wait to decide if he redshirts, like if Nick Lee medals. Because if he medals, now it's like, okay, we got to go through the whole tournament, and then Nick Lee's sitting for us in Final X, versus if Nick Lee doesn't medal, then, okay, well, now we're just in the bracket with everybody else, and we feel like we can beat everybody else. So it's a lot to go through, and I think you said it right, Mark. I thought I would disagree. I don't know that it's not if I disagree, I say it's not our best way because we got a ton of hammers there. We just don't have a guy that is world-class dominant. But there's a ton of guys with college credentials that are superstars. But he, certainly is. It's not like, oh, well, he can't beat, it's not like Jordan Burroughs in his prime is in his weight where you go, oh, well, that'd be a massive hill to climb. Like, no, he's probably in there a couple points, give or take, with all those guys.
Yep.
So, okay, let's get to some interesting stuff. What are you guys doing up there in Iowa with gambling? Who wants to tell me what's going on up there?
Go ahead, Grant.
Oh boy. I mean, what a press release that went out everywhere, including all different sports, including like wrestling, football, basically for anybody that hasn't looked into it or hasn't looked at what has kind of transpired here is that there was like a gambling probe into Iowa State University and to their athletic department, encompassing like, I think, a whole bunch of different sports. But the things that were released yesterday was Iowa State football starting quarterback Hunter Deckers. I think they're starting offensive guard. I think his name is Saucer. Panero Johnson, Big 12 champ. In wrestling, and I believe there was maybe one or two other football players that were named in the article about it. But just something to the effect of basically gambling on even institutional athletics, even though maybe they weren't a part of like the football team, but bet on wrestling, or the wrestling team bet on football. And then in some cases where they were betting on same sport, even though they may not have even been in the game. This report goes all the way back, I think maybe a couple of years. Once again, a lot to unpack that I don't have the legal terminology to basically concisely tell you exactly what infringements of the Big 10 or Big 12, NCAA guidelines. But just, I would say catastrophic results for some of the athletes that may lose all of their eligibility, some of their eligibility, percentage of their season. I don't know what the reprimand will be quite yet, but for the wrestling context, losing Panero Johnson for the Iowa State wrestling team would be like detrimental with as much talent and IP brings to the team, and also just point scoring in general for both the Big 12s and NCAA tournament this upcoming season.
Mark, thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think this whole investigation supposedly is what I've read and heard, is that it was supposed to be targeting underage betting in the state of Iowa with FanDuel and all these websites now that you can bet on. And I guess what a lot of these younger people did, and some of the athletes that are involved in this investigation from the universities, is that they would set up the account in their parents' names, whether it's a mother or father, and then they'd have control of the account. So that's how they were doing it. And then they were trying to hide that when the investigation came out. But it kind of linked back to their cell phones, where their cell phones were being used, because that's what they did, all their betting online. And so it kind of made a mess. I know there's a baseball player from Iowa that played in, I think, so many games this year. He's out of Urbandale or Johnston here in the Des Moines area, a big-time recruit, and he has quit baseball completely from the University of Iowa. So it's not just Iowa State guys. There's a lot of Iowa guys that are involved in it also, football program, wrestling program. We just haven't heard what's come out of it yet in those individuals. So we're going to find out what happens. But to lose, Johnson from Iowa State at 149, if that's what happens, that's a big hit. And, I watched Kevin Dresser do an interview a month ago, and they were talking about it, and he was furious about the whole thing, that we're not, you're letting – these are adults. If they want to bet on something, what's the harm? We're giving these guys hundreds of thousands of dollars, NIL money, and if they want to use it, they're adults. Let them do what they want to do. This is ridiculous. And then it comes to, if you're betting on a sport at your school, you may have inside information. And some of these kids aren't betting $50 or $20 on a game. They're betting into the thousands. So that's an issue. So I can see it both ways.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I think let's start with the stuff we know for sure. The legal gambling age in Iowa is 21. So, I think there's a few states where legal gambling age is 18. So that's probably the first thing, like the one thing we know for sure. So if you're going to gamble, like I got to use mom and dad's account, until I'm 21, like you were saying. So that's, and I get it. Like I shouldn't say this, but like my parents gave me a little bit of money when I went off to college. And we used to just play it wasn't penny poker, but we used to play poker in the dorms. And we used to play poker and spades. And I was good enough that I never asked my parents for money until I literally came home for Christmas. So, but again, that's like making an extra $20-$30 a week. So you got some stuff to do on the weekends. And there was no NIL. There was no nothing like that. To me, it kind of reminds me of the Pete Rose thing, right? Like you can't bet on your own team, even to win, certainly not to lose. But it's also, what is the rule, right? Like, what do you know the rules are ahead of time? And then how much of this is optics? Like this takes me down a whole path of the NCAA as a regulating body is just, to me, it's kind of a complete joke. Like they came up with NIL, and the analogy I always use is like, I own the restaurant, and before Grant, who is my best server, wasn't allowed to keep his own tips. Now I'm going to let him keep his own tips. I'm not actually paying him anymore, but now he can actually keep the money that the people he waited on just says he deserves. And then NIL is a complete joke, because how many people, when you see these people, are actually doing ads, are doing an autograph convention, or doing, it's pay for play. And so, I mean, like you guys are saying, how do you have hundreds of thousands? How do you have tens of thousands of dollars to bet? If you're 20 years old, like we all wrestled in college. It takes a lot of hours, and we all went to college in college, and it takes a few hours, depending on how hard your major is and how good of a student you are. There's at least some time commitment to that theoretically. And so for them to go out and say, okay, you can't do this. Now, if the rules are ahead of time, you can't do it, then you can't do it. And I don't know what the punishments were with those rules originally. I mean, I think if we just take it back to wrestling, we had talked about this conceptually, like there was a 10%, 20%, 30%, 100% of your season punishment. And this goes to another conversation that really nobody cares about the beginning of the season. You know, like nobody really cares about anything until the Cliff Keen Las Vegas tournament. So if he loses 30% of the season, okay. And, you know, Swiderski wants to go 49 anyway. So maybe, you know, I know Pinheiro already redshirted. I don't know if he goes down to 41. I don't have their lineup memorized. I know they brought in some guys from the portal. It just seems excessive. I mean, I get the part about using inside information and gambling on your own team or your own sport or your own school. I totally get that. I just feel like the hypocrisy of this is like, okay, we're going to take a stand on this. We don't care that people are getting money for basically doing nothing. GT, you mentioned Damian Hahn had talked about the NIL and the pay-for-play situation. And I don't mean to take it down that path, so I guess I'm doing that. But, I mean, like, it's all tied to economic stuff. So I just saw clips, but you said you maybe watched a little bit more of it. What did you see on it?
Well, I think this extends the conversation to regulation. When the first NIL came out, it wasn't necessarily regulated. Like it's basically completely the Wild West when it comes to, you know, whatever it is. I know that, like, for right now, you know, as far as terminology and all that other stuff, let's say, for instance, like, you just basically pay Mark Ostrander $100,000 to be Mark Ostrander and just wrestle. Like, okay, so in that, you can't, like, what I had been told, I believe, by some of the administrators across the country is that you could not necessarily say, Mark, if you win the Hodge Trophy, I'll give you another 100,000. Or if you're a Big 12 champ, I'll give you another 50,000.
No incentive clauses.
Right. So that's where it becomes sticky, where you're like, hey, just flat out, I have to pay you $500,000 just for you waking up every day, you being Mark.
Yeah.
Now, but the thing is it like, then how much of that does Mark really have to do in like social media posts or, you know, appearances, you know, just being himself, doing camps or whatever it may be. So I think a long time ago, and this is the conversation that I had with an administrator at a university, was, you know, back in the day when Oklahoma got into trouble for athletes just showing up on car lots to, like, help sell cars on Sunday afternoons after a big win. And it's like, well, hey, you know, that's just bringing Mark Ostrander up to the lot. And, you know, once again, if you buy a Ford pickup truck today, you know, you get to have an autograph signed car mat by Mark Ostrander. But
sun visor.
Right, whatever it may be. What it is now is that, and I think I'm basically like summarizing, you know, the interview is that it's more of a pay for play situation in wrestling, where it's like, hey, David and Mark are really good at wrestling. I'm just going to offer them a whole bunch of money. I don't really care what they do for their appearances or name, image, and likeness. I just need their talent. Now, whether that money comes from the RTC, a donor, whatever it may be, you know, no one's regulating that money. So that's where a lot of that stuff is becoming, I would say, systematic when it comes to, like, offering, you know, big kids big money for big deals in college athletics. And once again, imagine what we're facing in wrestling. It's 18 billion times larger in football.
Yeah.
Than basketball, or, you know, women's basketball, or whatever the higher tiered sports of NCAA collegiate athletics. There's a lot more athletes in football. There's a lot more athletes in basketball. You know, once again, you get down in these Olympic level sports, and all of a sudden you only have so many Olympic level talent in the collegiate ranks. You make the best women's field hockey team of all time with, you know, whatever kind of budget you would want to be able to throw at it.
Yeah, like college gymnastics women, I think, has less than 20 schools that do gymnastics. So, you know, I think, like, I mean, it's really well said. I think part of the NIL thing is they're not even pretending that Mark Ostrander has to come out and sign autographs. He just gets the money. Like I'm interested. I saw Netflix is coming out with a thing about Johnny Manziel, and I can't wait to see that because he got in trouble for all that stuff, and he was just not very good at hiding it. Honestly, I get breaking the rules and I get sins, but I hope Pinheiro doesn't get hosed for the whole season. I hope he gets to wrestle when it counts. I think all of us that are just fans of wrestling, want to see the best kids wrestle. And as GT will tease me off the air when I blew a gasket when Pinheiro Johnson wasn't ranked number 1 when he should have been ranked number 1. So,
well, I guess I want to add a little something to this. When
Go ahead.
NIL came out, I was under the assumption that if somebody wanted to use your name, likeness, image, you had to go through the administration at the school that you were at to see if it was okay to use that sponsor, because you couldn't use it for beer, you couldn't use it for marijuana, things like that. Sponsoring you. Budweiser couldn't sponsor you because you were underage, and that's not what we want here, things like that. Yet now it seems like donors are just giving money to these sports programs, and the sports programs are deciding within themselves who gets that money. Am I correct with that, Grant?
To be honest, Mark, there's so many different, I think, state entities, university entities that would basically have some sort of governance over it for each institution. I believe you are right. Like, you can't be sponsored by like an alcohol brand or, something along those lines where like, hey, you're 18 years old. You can't be sponsored by an alcohol brand or something like that. But I don't know how it would have been all set up. I think there was conversations about, some of these athletes becoming like university employees. I think there's just so much that was, once again, unregulated at the very beginning of this, and then attempts to regulate themselves. There was no NCAA governance over the top of it. So I believe that's what they're even discussing at, like, let's say Congress or the Senate, about being able to step in and help with NIL regulation. Because I believe a lot of the football coaches across the country are expressing concerns to their senators, House representatives to help with this. So I don't think you've seen the last of it when it comes to NIL, and I don't think you've seen the last of it when it comes to these gambling probes, which brings us back to, basically how we got to this particular part. But it's, there's just I don't want to see athletes lose out on potential parts of their season due to, gambling probes, NIL, fraud or something like that.
But I also don't want to turn into the Wild West where you can gamble on your own teams, because then you're going to get into point shaving, things like that. And that's what everybody was concerned about when all this gambling stuff started, because that takes away from the sport. It's not a pure sport if somebody knows something that other people don't know, and then they're putting a lot of money on the line. They're going to collect on that just because they had inside information. If somebody's not going to play one weekend because they're in trouble, nobody knows about it, but they do, things like that. I don't have a problem with that. And I don't have a problem with the NCAA or whoever, setting rules and regulations. The kids know that coming in, that they can't gamble on their own sport. They can't gamble on a school activity, one of the other sports within the, university. And if you do, and you get caught, you're done probably. And it's a ban for life in all sports. So it's not like Pinheiro Johnson. If, all this comes out that he did what they say he did, I'm not sure how he's going to come back from that. I don't think he'll be able to, because there are rules, even though they've changed the rules a little bit. I think, 3 months ago, they changed it, but they still have a lifetime ban if you bet on a sport at your university. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm super hesitant. It's kind of funny because I thought we weren't going to have that much to talk about this week, and that's not the case. But like, I'm super hesitant to say any of these people are guilty. Like,
Sure.
seen all kinds of things over the years, from like the Duke lacrosse team to a bunch of other things that it ended up not being true. So I think, again, this is probably, I think we can probably say this as, but I'll say what this is not the opinion of USA Wrestling, but I think all three of us are like innocent until proven guilty. You guys mentioned some things tied to this. I know for a fact one company that was getting athletes, and they added these kids, they're, I guess, young men, but they're adding them as employees and giving them health and just putting them on their payroll rather than paying them, rather than 1099ing, W-2ing them, because then it helped bring down their group insurance rate. Like, this is like a real thing. Like, I know for a fact this happened. I know both sides told me it happened. So, I mean, there's some high-level thought processes going on here and figuring it out. The other thing is, like, I watched the interview that Christian Piles did with Tom Ryan, and, he talked about how, like all their kids, none of them came out of the portal, and that he thinks that the only way to stop the portal is for a kid to lose a year. And that opens up a whole nother can of worms, Pandora's box. Like, well, is there an exception if the coach leaves? Is there an exception if you're a graduate student? If you haven't used your redshirt year, then can you just use your redshirt year to eat that year? Or is it an absolute loss of eligibility forever? Because then, like, you would see these graduates not transferring. So it's all that stuff gets super, super complicated. And I think, and I just kind of wanted to touch on this, but I don't know if we'll get into it. Probably talk more next week. It feels like coaches are forced to be more and more in the recruiting business and less in the development business. And I think even if you're a guy, like the person I know that loves to develop wrestlers that I love more than anybody in the world is my dad. Like, he didn't mind recruiting a kid who wasn't very good, and if it took him 2 years to just be okay, but he became a better person in the process and he became a better wrestler, he was all about it. But he was also at a junior college where his salary and his income were not dependent on whether or not his team won nationals or not. When you're at these big schools and you're expected to win, you don't have as much patience in that process. So I feel like it's a lot easier for me to just go sign Grant Turner and get him to switch singlets. I mean, and think about that in the real world. Like, if you're a competing gear company and you can bring a Grant Turner over and all his Rolodex, his cell phone list, all the people he has connections with in the world that think of him very positively, and we all tease each other, but this is both personally and professionally, we like working with Grant Turner. I would be in business with Grant Turner, and you can move him. And this happens in every walk of life. This happens with lawyers, with doctors, with professors. Hey, you're a well-published professor, so you're going to go come to this university because you write papers and it brings more notoriety and we get more enrollment. That is going on all the time. And if I were starting a clothing company and I could afford him, I would hire Grant Turner because I already know what he's like to work with. So I don't think you're ever going to stop this. Like, I think it really comes down to the enforcement of it, right? Like, they went to the RTCs and said, you can't pay for room and board. Well, supposedly that's stopped, but nobody's turned anybody in. And the reason why I had this conversation with my parents, the reason why nobody turns anybody in is because everybody's cheating somewhat. It's like, Mark, if you don't claim $100 on your taxes and I don't claim $10,000 on my taxes and you turn me in, I'm like, well, I'm going to turn you in too. And you're still going to get audited. It won't be as bad, but there's going to be pain in your life too. So nobody just turns anybody in. And the NCAA doesn't care. Like GT said it right. He didn't say it this way, but they don't care. They just care about basketball and football because those are the ones making all the money. Every other sport basically is not making money for the NCAA. Like the NCAA wrestling tournament makes money, but if you take into account the whole season, these tournaments are losing money. Duels are losing money. So it's such, you could probably do a 30 for 30 special on this and be 9 episodes and not get into all of it. So, all right, let's end on a happy note. So we got the rest of the U17s coming up. I got a couple buddies that are posting stuff even now, like they're practicing, warming up over there, the boys freestyle team. I told you guys about Morgan Turner. She's in the semis over there. So shout out Beat the Street Chicago, Mike Powell, Mike Boyd, that whole crew. I think we're going to see a lot more medals coming up here. And it's August. We're getting through the dog days of summer, but we're about to hit school year. And then it's going to be time for previews. And then we're creeping up on the World Championships, and we'll see. The World Championships are gigantic for the Olympic trials process. So definitely something to keep in mind there. Anything else before we take off, boys?
Nope.
All right. All right. Well, we appreciate everybody who watches and listens, and we will be back next week.